Take the plunge and listen to Guernsey Deep Dive. Don't forget to like, share, and follow.
Okay, picture this. A street looks normal enough, shocks, houses, people living their lives. But underneath, well, it's buzzing with something else. Public arguments, private dramas spilling out. That's really the feeling you get from the documents we've got for this deep dive into Cornet Street.
It really is. We've pulled together quite a collection here. Reports, letters.
Yeah.
All focused on this one single place. They're like little snapshots, aren't they? Little windows into daily life in Guernsey back then.
Yeah, exactly. And for you listening, this isn't just, old history. It's a chance to see how all these separate bits, these incidents, these worries actually build up a picture of a whole community. You can see the social stuff playing out, the everyday problems, maybe even hints of things starting to change.
Precisely. And the sources cover a lot of ground. We've got newspaper bits detailing, well, everything from people being drunk and disorderly assaults right through to things like fires and accidents.
Wow, quite the range.
Yeah. And alongside those, there are letters, to the editor, people writing in about the state of the local cemetery or worrying about keeping order on the street itself. So our job here is to sort of unpack all this and see what story Cornet Street tells us.
Okay, let's dive in then. Maybe start with that public order side of things. It sounds like Cornet Street wasn't always the most peaceful spot. Lots of mentions of disorderly conduct. What did that actually mean, judging by the examples?
Well, the reports give us some pretty concrete examples, like Eva Carré found drunk, screaming late at night, causing real disturbance.
Okay.
Then there's a teenager who got arrested for basically yelling abuse at a Mr. Gehan in the street. So disorderly conduct seems to cover things like public drunkenness, being really loud, just generally causing trouble in public.
It seems like public intoxication pops up a bit.
It does. That and noise. Maybe it suggests, well, perhaps fewer private places for people to unwind, or just different ideas back then about what was acceptable public behavior. Yeah. It definitely paints a picture of a street that was, alive, but sometimes pretty rowdy.
And not just general rowdiness. There were specific complaints about bad language, too, right? Tell us about Mrs. Hockaday and Eva Carré again.
Ah, yes, that one's quite detailed. And Mr. Lepoidovan complained about them using what he called obscene language. This was right outside his coal store, number 39.
Right in front of his business.
Exactly. And the report says Eva Carré kept up her vile vocabulary for a whole hour before Mrs. Hockaday even joined in.
An hour, wow.
Yeah, and then they apparently carried on this amusement, as the report calls it, for quite a while longer. And importantly, someone else saw it. Mr. Richard Sammers backed up the story. So it wasn't just a quick outburst. It was pretty public and went on for some time.
Sounds like more than just a few crosswords. Okay, then there was that incident with soldiers and civilians. That sounds potentially more serious.
Oh, definitely. That was a bigger breach of the peace. Happened just before 10 p.m., and it apparently blew up into a proper free fight on the street, soldiers and civilians involved.
A free fight.
And what's more, it seems linked to soldiers trying to break a military prisoner out of the guardhouse nearby.
Really?
Yeah, so that suggests something maybe a bit more organized, or at least more volatile, than just a random street scuffle.
Right. So with all this going on, who was actually keeping the peace? We see police mentioned and special constables. How did that work?
Well, they were the ones making arrests, bringing people to court, so the regular police were definitely active.
Okay.
But there's also this mention of a Mr. Michon as a special constable for Cornet Street.
Wow.
That sounds like a sort of localized effort, doesn't it?
Like a neighborhood watch with a bit more power.
Something like that, yeah. Special constables usually had official standing to help the regular police, often focused on a specific area. So their presence was the formal response, even if they couldn't stop everything from happening.
Okay, moving beyond the general public order stuff, Cornet Street also seems to have had its fair share of personal disputes turning nasty. What about the assault by Yves Lecoq on his sister-in-law?
Right, that one happened around 8:30 in the evening inside a house on the street. And we know several people gave testimony. Mrs. Beant herself, Mr. Zabiella, the constable involved.
So it went to court properly.
It did. And Lecoq ended up with a choice. Pay a fine or do a short stint in jail. Shows there were consequences.
Then there's that really awful-sounding assault on Mrs. Udall at number 19. The details are quite grim.
They really are. She had a bad head wound above her ear, lots of bleeding, and they actually found a piece of glass in the wound.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and there was a broken paraffin lamp on the floor nearby, so the assumption was that was the weapon. A man named Tom Turode, who apparently lived with her, was arrested.
Goodness. Did she recover?
The report says she did, thankfully.
Yeah.
But it really highlights how violent things could get, possibly in a domestic setting.
And we've got Eva Correa popping up again, this time with a man named Ferguson. That relationship sounds difficult.
Difficult is probably putting it mildly. Eva accused Ferguson of pushing her around, being abusive. But then Ferguson himself admitted he'd given her a black eye just 2 weeks before.
Oh.
So it points to a really volatile, possibly abusive situation in that household. Maybe violence from both sides, it's hard to say. It's a reminder, isn't it, that these street incidents are often tied up with what's happening behind closed doors.
Absolutely. And then maybe the most shocking one, the alleged incident with Mrs. Case and Dillon, throwing him from a 3-story window. That sounds incredible.
It's, incredibly dramatic. Dillon fell all that way, was knocked unconscious, suffered from shock, but apparently, amazingly, didn't break any bones.
That's unbelievable.
It really is. Mrs. Case was arrested, though, and held on a charge of actually throwing him out. It just stands out as so extreme. Makes you wonder what on earth was going on there.
Yeah, definitely. But it wasn't all conflict and violence, was it? There were accidents, too. Things just happening. Like the fire at the tobacco store, that must have caused a bit of panic.
Oh, I imagine so. A fire starting around 5 in the morning, that would wake people up fast. It was near the top end of the street, this tobacco store, part of a bigger property leased out to various people.
And a tobacco factory. Lots of flammable stuff around, presumably.
Exactly. Machinery and a warehouse nearby full of tobacco.
Yeah.
So yeah, the potential for a really big fire was definitely there.
So how did they manage it? Could have been much worse.
It sounds like the response was pretty good, actually. People in nearby buildings raised the alarm quickly. The parish fire engines got there in less than half an hour, apparently.
That's quick for back then.
Yeah, and then the Castle Cornet Brigade arrived. And crucially, they managed to get their engine right into the yard, close to the fire. The Mutual Insurance Brigade turned up quickly, too.
So a coordinated effort.
Seems like it. They managed to contain it. There was still damage, to the building, the machines, some tobacco, furniture. Yeah. But the main insured warehouse was saved. They never figured out how it started, though. The cause remained unknown.
Okay, and another unexpected event, Adelaide Beglin falling from a window? That sounds a bit mysterious, too.
It does, yeah. Happened sometime between 8 and 9 p.m. She fell from a back window of a house where a Mrs. Bartlett lived. But the strange thing is, she was apparently alone in the room at the time.
Oh. So no witnesses to what happened.
Seems not. Makes it hard to know if it was an accident or, something else. She was badly injured, fractures in her thigh and kneecap. The police and doctor came, and she went off to the town hospital. But yeah, that lack of explanation does leave a question mark hanging over it.
Right. So beyond all these specific incidents, the sources also talk about wider community issues, don't they? And the street itself. Let's talk about the cemetery first. Sounds like people had strong opinions.
They certainly did. And conflicting ones, too. We've got one letter to the editor calling the Cornet Street Cemetery disreputable. Just generally complaining about how cemeteries on the island were managed, actually.
How so?
Well, the writer compares it unfavorably to England, where they had paid custodians. They suggest the lack of puiler that here showed kind of apathy, maybe disrespect for the dead. It even mentions the Tupper family ashes being removed because of the state it was in.
Strong words. But there was another view, wasn't there, about the old churchyard?
That's right, yeah. A later letter sounds much more positive. The writer seems encouraged that people were taking an interest in improving the old churchyard. They mentioned funds being collected to level the ground, tidy up the tombstones, put in paths and benches.
Seems quite proactive.
It does. And this writer even suggests putting up a big granite cross in the middle with a specific inscription about preserving its sacred character. So it shows there was a part of the community invested in caring for these spaces. A real contrast in attitudes there, perhaps.
Interesting. And that ties into another letter, maybe, about noise near St. Barnabas. Back to the public order theme again.
It does connect, yeah. This letter, signed R.I.P., interestingly enough.
Appropriate.
Complains about kids and even some adults apparently shrieking and howling and messing about outside St. Barnabas, especially on Sunday evenings, probably when services were letting out.
Right. Not ideal.
Not at all. And the writer specifically asks for the police to patrol that area sometimes. Just reinforces those ongoing issues with keeping things quiet and orderly in parts of Cornet Street.
And maybe some of these problems were actually linked to the street's physical layout. One source goes into a lot of detail about the actual construction.
Yes, this is really fascinating stuff. It gets into the nitty-gritty of the street's design because it was built literally into the side of a cliff.
Okay.
There's a huge difference between the east side and the west side. The east side got sea breezes, sunlight, but the west side was crammed right up against the cliff, with another lane, Rosemary Lane, looming over it.
So dark and damp.
Exactly. Very little sun, poor ventilation. The source says the lower rooms were basically dark, damp, unhealthy. And because of that, they tended to be lived in by, well, the poorest people, or folks described as undesirable aliens. So you've got clear socioeconomic factors and public health worries tied directly to the buildings themselves.
It's striking how those urban planning issues and inequalities were being discussed even then, isn't it? Problems we still sort of wrestle with.
Absolutely.
So what did they suggest doing about it? It sounds like it needed drastic action.
The suggestions were pretty drastic. Basically, the idea was for the authorities, the states, or the parish to buy up the entire western side of the street. Compulsory purchase, essentially.
Wow, that's major.
Huge. But a big hurdle mentioned was the incredibly complicated property ownership, these things called rentes.
Rentes, what are they exactly?
There weren't simple rents or leases, more like inherited ground rents, often split between lots and lots of different people over generations. Made it almost impossible to get everyone to agree on selling or redeveloping.
I see. A legal nightmare.
Pretty much. So the plan was, buy it all, knock it down, make the street much wider to get light and air in, and then maybe build new industrial dwellings.
Industrial dwellings, like worker housing.
Presumably, yeah.
Yeah.
Better standard housing. But this was all tied up with maybe needing to level Rosemary Lane above it too. And there was even a suggestion that if they couldn't guarantee enough light for living space on the ground floors of new buildings, they should just be used for storage.
That really shows how bad the conditions must have been, but it sounds like these grand plans didn't actually happen. The source mentions unfinished schemes.
That's the impression, yes. The reasons given were, well, partly that the schemes maybe weren't ambitious enough to fix the core problems properly. And again, that massive practical headache of the rents, the complex ownership, just made large-scale change incredibly difficult to pull off.
You really have to wonder what that meant long-term for the people living on that western side, stuck in those conditions. Okay, so let's try and pull this all together. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. What are the main things for you, the listener, to take away from Cornet Street?
Well, I think it's clear Cornet Street was a real mix. Definitely vibrant, people living, working, but also, volatile sometimes. You had the everyday stuff, businesses running, but also these frequent public flare-ups, personal conflicts, turning violent, accidents, fires.
A lot going on in one place.
A huge amount. And underneath it all, these quite serious social issues and problems with the actual buildings and infrastructure, which clearly affected people's lives. These sources, they really give us these incredibly sharp, vivid glimpses, don't they? Yeah. Snapshots of individual lives playing out against these bigger community worries and the physical reality of the street.
Yeah, they do. And what questions are we sort of left with? What remains unresolved?
Well, quite a few things, really. You wonder, what actually happened to those big improvement plans for Cornet Street? Did they ever manage to widen it or deal with the western side? What did the street end up looking like years later? And the cemetery reforms. Did they get that custodian or the granite cross? And maybe the biggest question is about the deeper reasons behind all the incidents. What were the underlying social pressures, the economic factors driving some of this conflict and difficulty?
Lots to still think about. So finally, why should you, listening now, care about these old records from one street? What's the gain?
I think by really getting into the details like this, you get a much richer feel for how communities actually work, or maybe sometimes how they struggle to work. You see the complexities of town life and just the timeless human stuff, really conflict, worry, but also that desire people have to make things better.
It brings the past to life in a very real way.
It does. These glimpses of Cornet Street, they remind us that every place has its story, doesn't it? And even small details in old reports can shed light on bigger truths about how people lived. And maybe, just maybe, some of those truths still echo today in the challenges our own communities face.
Thanks for listening to Guernsey Deep Dive. Don't forget to follow for the latest updates. Any questions or queries, email guernseydeepdive@gmail.com.